Hi, I'm Raphael. I'm a software developer and I'm doing a video series on moving or spending some time in 38 different countries from the perspective of a software developer. So if you are a developer or something that feels close enough, then this may be a great guide for you to find out if you should move to or spend some time in a certain country. Today, we're starting off with a part of Canada, Quebec. So that's the French-speaking part of Canada in the east. You may or may not have heard of this region because they speak a very particular kind of French, the so-called Quebecois. Have you mastered French and never had an issue speaking French anywhere? Well, in Quebec, everything will be different. So my advice is doing the same as you would with cold water. Immerse yourself in it step by step. And the best thing is if you start with the most international city in Quebec, and that's Montreal. Or, as most Northern Americans would say, Montreal. So, how would anyone describe Montreal in just a few words? Well, maybe it's kind of like Berlin, but without the ugly graffiti. Instead, there's only pretty graffiti, which they call murals. So in general, Montreal has a much cleaner and also more British touch to it. So how does that sound? I would say it's pretty good. It's almost like Montreal is tailored exactly for hipsters, expats. It's multicultural, it's modern, everything in one city. So instead of leaving the past completely behind them, Montrealers like to convert old buildings and factories with many red bricks into hotels, apartments, office buildings, and sometimes breweries with really tasty beer. What also makes Quebec a bit different from other parts of the US or Canada is that they are more relaxed about alcohol and I would say partying in general. So in many parts of Northern America, you have this sort of Puritan heritage, no alcohol, or at least you need to hide it and so on. And instead a pure focus on work. In Quebec, you can feel there is a different influence. People are a bit more relaxed, as you might know in general from Europe. You can buy alcohol in almost every store. It's not special stores where you have to go to special liquor stores, unlike in the rest of Canada. And it's not as weirdly regulated as in the US, where you always need to show an ID, even if you're obviously above 21 or stuff like that. To get a better feeling of Montreal, we did 4 amazing tours. The first one we did was the red light tour with Nicolas. Montreal had a really interesting history in the 20th century with an important red light district. I can highly recommend the tour. Nicolas will show you how Montreal developed in the decades, how the topic of prostitution and all sorts of other aspects that you have in a red light district were handled, and how the local population responded to it, and so on. The second tour we did was a food tour with Andrea, who is an ex-Airbnb employee and really knows Montreal very well. Then the next tour we did was the Jewish food tour from Roundtable Tours. I recommend this especially if you're into bakeries, because that's what the tour starts with. A selection of what I think are the best bakeries in Montreal, at least from what I've seen. And I've been to many bakeries in the world, especially in the German-speaking area, you know, where you tend to have some of the best bakeries in general. So that's really a very, very great feature of Montreal. If you're into sweet stuff, but also savory stuff, baked goods, definitely do this tour. And then finally, if I had to pick, it was actually my favorite out of the tours, but it's maybe not the most typical tour that you would expect in Montreal. It's the Caribbean food tour by Nick. What makes this tour relevant to Montreal is that Montreal is a very international city. So not only do you have French and British influences, but you also have the Caribbean influences there, of course, with so many immigrants coming to Quebec and especially to Montreal. And of course, don't forget to start this tour, like most tours, hungry, because you do get a lot to eat, and it would be sad if you were already filled up after the first stop. The other important city in the province of Quebec is Quebec City, which is not only the capital of nowadays Quebec, but it used to be the capital of all of Canada in the past, before the Canadians eventually settled on Ottawa as their current capital. Quebec City at first looks a bit like Disneyland for, I don't know, maybe Americans. The most memorable picture that you might have actually seen of Quebec City before is this so-called Chateau Frontenac, which is a big hotel, not an actual castle or so, and it never was, but it looks like one. Back in the time, that was actually a thing. Hotels and important buildings, they were built in this chateau style, even if they were not meant to be that. Like, they were not a military defense building or anything like that, or the residence of the local leader. They were just built that way because people liked it. For me, that was really interesting to see, because nowadays Canada is basically part of this sort of English-based North American world, where English is obviously the most important language, and the French influences in North America are not so obvious at first if you come to the US or Canada. In the past, there were actually lots of important French settlements throughout North America, and you get to learn about all of these and how they fought back and forth with the British over the centuries, eventually leading to the British domination nowadays, but also leaving behind quite some French ancestry, and in Quebec City you can see a lot of that. Quebec City is also an interesting place for food in North America. You have, of course, the Québécois cuisine, so a sort of French-inspired Canadian cuisine, some more other restaurants trying to be authentically French, lots of British-inspired places, and of course poutine in every possible variation. But not only that, there's also Native American cuisine that you can enjoy in Quebec. Because what many people forget is that Europeans were not the first ones in North America. And that's why I always think it's interesting to try these sort of real, original North American cuisines. And you can find quite a few of them in Quebec City too. If you're looking for a great salary or hourly rate as a freelancer, keep in mind though that Canada doesn't have such a high salary or hourly rate level as some European countries do. And on the other hand, the cost of living is relatively high. So both in terms of rents, but also food and so on, you have to spend a lot of money. So if you just want to make a lot of money, then there are far better options than Quebec or actually anywhere in Canada. People-wise, I can really recommend Quebec. So even if it's maybe a bit intimidating if you don't speak French at all or not so well at first, people are super kind. They will speak English with you, and they of course speak it very well. It's not like in some parts of France maybe. People are very gentle and sweet and helpful and everything, so I can definitely recommend it. You can have a very good time with them, be it by going for a beer or going kayaking or something. I think the Quebecois are great people.